The tax cuts and reform are certainly not over, but we're going to move on to another topic. The FBI has been in hot water for the past few weeks as we've seen biased texts against anti-Trump bias at the FBI. What is the status of the investigation from the House? You're on the Oversight Committee, you're on the Judiciary Committee in the House. What is going on now with that scandal?
Well, I think it's important to point out, obviously there was a lot of anti-Trump sentiment with this key FBI agent, Peter Strzok, who is the lead agent for the Hillary investigation and the lead agent in this Russia investigation. But it was more than that. He wrote a text message to Lisa Page talking about a meeting that they had in Andrew McCabe's office, who's the FBI deputy director. And he said, I wish I could take what you said about Trump not being able to win and take that to the bank, but I'm not sure that the FBI can take that risk. And we need an insurance policy basically to stop Trump from being elected. So that is the reason he got kicked off the Mueller probe. And so the question is, what was that insurance policy? Most of us on the committees at this point go back to that Steele dossier that was paid for by Hillary and the Democratic Party to dig up dirt on Trump. There's a lot of fake news in there, false claims. Nevertheless, the FBI took cognizance of that dossier at some point. We're trying to figure out whether the FBI paid Christopher Steele for that, and then whether the FBI used any of that to get surveillance over Trump associates. And if that's the case, if the answer to those questions is yes, then what you have is the Obama DOJ working with the Hillary campaign and Democratic Party to get surveillance over someone associated with the opposite party. That's a major deal if true.
Right. So what about the accountability aspect of this? Because we have the American people who see this happening over and over again inside of the government. What are you doing specifically? Are there subpoenas on the table? Are contempt charges on the table for the FBI not answering your questions? Andy McCabe was on the Hill this week testifying. It doesn't seem like lawmakers are satisfied with what he said because his testimony was not in congruence with other testimony that's been given by other witnesses. So how does this actually move forward in terms of some kind of accountability and cleaning up the FBI?
So all subpoenas for sure. McCabe has come in, very unsatisfactory testimony, and you see the news today. He's moving on, and I think that may be a reason why. We need to subpoena Bruce Ohr, who was one of Sally Yates, the deputy AG's right-hand man at the Justice Department. He was meeting with the author of the dossier, Christopher Steele, during the election, and his wife works for Fusion GPS. So you got to subpoena Ohr, you got to subpoena the wife, you got to subpoena other folks like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page who were involved in this. They need to be under oath. They need to be deposed. None of the stuff like they did with Hillary where they just asked her some softball questions, didn't put her under oath, didn't transcribe. These are legitimate, transcribed, and if they lie, then they'll be held accountable. But contempt for sure. If the FBI isn't going to give us the information that we're asking for in terms of the dossier, then we should hold both Rosenstein and Christopher Wray in contempt.
Yeah, it's far from over. It's going to be a wild ride once we get back from the new year, I'm sure. Merry Christmas, Congressman Ron DeSantis. Thanks so much.
Merry Christmas.
Very busy night of news. My next guest says the FBI's Andrew McCabe viewed his job as one to help Democrats and hurt Trump, using whatever power he had from his FBI perch. Former DOJ attorney J. Christian Adams joins me now. It's great to see you. Now, we're going to start with what the president said about this. He's been criticizing the FBI publicly. President Trump tweeted a series of things today. This is one that he tweeted earlier. How can FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, the man in charge, along with leaking James Comey of the phony Hillary Clinton investigation, including her 33,000 illegally deleted emails, be given $700,000 for wife's campaign by Clinton puppets during investigation? Now, you were in it. You were in the Justice Department. You see how these creatures of government function. How does this happen? How is it that the FBI can treat people differently based on their political leanings?
People need to understand these people in the FBI and DOJ, they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They think this is normal operating procedure. What the president is referring to is Andrew McCabe's wife was running for office in Virginia, got a load of money from Terry McAuliffe, the governor, who was also under investigation by the FBI. And, of course, they don't have to return all that money in Virginia. Virginia. They can keep it so Andrew McCabe actually benefited.
Right.
These people don't think they're doing anything wrong. They think their job, apparently Andrew McCabe thinks, is to protect Democrats.
Well, so this week, Republicans, this week and last week, have been very critical of Andrew McCabe. You have Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, calling for him to be removed. We now hear that he's maybe going to retire here in a couple of months, making sure he gets enough time in to get his full pension. So Republican criticism seems warranted based on what we know so far.
Right, but he's still there. And best of all, Katie, he's in the HR department at the FBI where he can replicate himself. You know, I mean, they move people to HR instead of moving them out the door. But that's part of the problem is you have McCabe, you have Rod Rosenstein, who doesn't stop any of the leaks inside the Mueller investigation. He should be firing people who are leaking, not giving them the benefit of the doubt and praising them like he did this week.
So what about the firing? Because people are questioning, why is it that President Trump can't just remove Andrew McCabe from his position, right? My understanding, he is a civil servant. He is not a political appointee, and therefore the president cannot fire him. Now, can Christopher Wray, who is reported, who's the new FBI director, who is reportedly reassigned FBI top lawyer James Baker, or he has actually resigned as well. Is Christopher Wray able to do something about this problem in the FBI? Is he trying to clean house?
Wray is, but so are a lot of other people. And really the problem stops with Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein, who's the deputy attorney general after Sessions recused himself, he has a whole host of deputies who work for him who are giving cover to these FBI people. Anytime this gets brought up, Rosenstein and his deputies push back. They defend McCabe. They defend the FBI. So the problem is both at the FBI but also inside the DOJ.
So there's nothing that the president can do. Should the president be getting involved? Is it consequential for him to be tweeting about it? Does that hurt the inspector general's investigation into the bias at the FBI, or is it best that he just kind of stays out of it?
Look, I think it's good that we finally have a president who fights back against these bureaucrats, because these bureaucrats have been getting away with it for a very long time. Finally, somebody's paying attention. Thank goodness they're at 1,600.
Well, what about the bureaucrats, though? Because the frustration, as I talked about in the first block with Congressman DeSantis, is there never seems to be any accountability. The IRS was turned into a political tool and weapon against conservatives. It seems like, and based on your experience and what you know, this is the same situation.
Right. Look, they have normalized politics at the Justice Department. You wrote about this about Fast and Furious. You saw this starting to happen years ago, where Holder and Obama began to turn this engine of government power into something that helps their ideological agenda. That's what's happening here. That's what happened during the election.
So how do we move forward with this? How is it that, you know, we live in Washington, D.C., or in Virginia, I call the freedom side of the river. It is anyway so far. It might change. But this is a blue area. This is a liberal area. The federal government is inherently deeply connected to liberal politics. So how is it that we have this going forward, and how do we make sure that there isn't political bias at the FBI?
Well, look, the people who care about this in middle America and regular real world, not around here, need to be vocal, need to tell their senator, tell their president, don't allow this corruption to continue. Don't allow people like Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok and that whole gang of activist law enforcement agents to influence politics. That's not their job.
So what about people who would push back and say they're not activists? They're not a gang of politically motivated people. They were simply doing their job.
Yeah, I read the tweets, or I read the texts. That's not a gang of neutral people. That's a gang of people who want to use their power to sabotage a presidential campaign. That's what the FBI did under Andrew McCabe and his cohorts. That's what is still going on at the Justice Department in Rod Rosenstein's office with all of his deputies defending Andrew McCabe.
Well, Jay Christian Adams, always appreciate your input.
Thanks,
and
Kate.
bringing your experience to the table. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Street justice still ahead, and next, the White House with an angry response after an explosive New York Times article says the president made offensive comments about immigrants. All of it based on anonymous sources, of course. So is it fair? We're going to debate it next. Developing tonight, the White House denying a New York Times report citing anonymous sources that say President Trump spoke about immigrants, specifically groups from Haiti and Africa, in a derogatory way. The comments allegedly came during a June meeting with top administration officials. Only the White House says it didn't happen, responding, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in the meeting deny these outrageous claims, and it's both sad and telling the New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. Here with reaction To this and much more, former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor David Tafuri and GOP strategist Ned Ryan. Well, Ned, here we have another New York Times story with a bunch of anonymous sources alleging that the president used the words AIDS to describe people living in Haiti and Huts to describe refugees or immigrants from Nigeria. What do you have to say about this?
Well, Katie, I mean, this is hardly surprising. Here we go again. The opposition party at work. Again, the White House is denying. It's another anonymously sourced piece that is another sad attack on Donald Trump. But, Katie, I think we're going to see more of this. We're going to see this increase as time goes along because, listen, their Russian collusion fairy tale is falling apart. Mm-hmm. The wheels are coming off the Mueller investigation. You see the economy surging. You see the markets surging. Trump's actually closing out a very strong first year despite a lot of different attacks. And the mainstream media, I think, starting to get a little bit more desperate. I mean, this guy wasn't supposed to win in the first place, Katie. Now he's actually succeeding. Wasn't he supposed to be impeached by now, according to some of them? Dear God, he's actually succeeding. And you see this liberal elite fury rising that those damnable peasants won't listen to us anymore. And I would tell the mainstream media, you know what? Get used to disappointment and get used to another 7 years of Trump because it's going to happen.
David, what's your reaction to another New York Times story throwing out these very aggressive allegations and without any on-the-record sources to back them up?
I hope your viewers will read this story because it paints a really troubling picture of the White House, and it's based on two sources who were in the meeting, and
anonymous.
Both of those sources...
Anonymous.
Yeah, they're anonymous because they get fired.
Put your name on the record.
Because they get fired if they said who they were. But they also contemporaneously told other people about these comments, and in the story itself is based on dozens of interviews that the New York Times did. And the New York Times knew that they was going to get a lot of pushback on this story, so it brought it up to its top editors. It evaluated the story, and you can be sure it's standing behind the story. Of course, we have libel laws, we have defamation. If anyone thinks the story is not true, they can bring an action against the New York Times.
The president's not going to.
I bet that's not going to happen because it hasn't happened yet.
Well,
you know what?
The president is not going to. No. Let's move on to a different topic. The president is not going to bring a lawsuit against the New York Times because he'd be suing them every single day. However, let's move on to another topic. Last week, Attorney General Jeff Sessions officially announced an investigation into the handling of the Uranium One scandal under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Ned, is this a good idea? Where is this going to go?
Of course it is. It's about time. I mean, I have a lot of questions. I wrote a piece actually for Fox News Opinion back in October. This deal was done in an expedited fashion. The CFIUS voting members, they got the paperwork in the first week of August of 2010. It was approved October 22nd of 2010. And there were deals, Katie. This was approved faster than a lot of the mergers between two U.S. companies that were approved by the antitrust division inside Obama's DOJ. Why was it expedited? The other question, Katie, is why were we giving away uranium when we actually have to import 89% of the uranium that we use? The other question I think needs to be answered is, we knew, some of the CFIUS voting members knew, there was a bribery attempt by the Russian government of U.S. executives in the uranium industry, and they still went ahead and approved this issue. And the last one, the $145 million question, Katie, is what is the relationship between the Uranium One deal and the Clinton Foundation? Was our Secretary of State at that time influence peddling and actually using her position for personal gain and putting it ahead of our national security interests?
So, David, on that note of national security, given your experience and your advising to former President Barack Obama, if Democrats are so worried about Russia being an influence in the world and being an enemy of the United States, which they are, by the way, why would Hillary Clinton sit on this board of directors, essentially, while having this conflict of interest at the Clinton Foundation, the Global Initiative, and approve the sale of uranium to Russia through another company?
It's important to get some of the facts straight. It's not a board of directors. CFIUS is a U.S. government committee that approves of mergers and acquisitions that will affect national security. There are 9 heads of U.S. government agencies on that committee. So there was no way that Hillary Clinton on her own could have dominated that committee. And any one out of the 9 can stop a deal. All 9 voted in favor of this deal. So it's important to get the facts right. Now, this is about 7 or 8 years old. It's been investigated before. If there's new evidence, like this informant,
But here's
it should be it should be.
David,
you know what, Ned?
here's
Let me
my
finish.
question.
Let
David, let me ask you another
It should be
question.
investigated, and if anything else comes up, then we should investigate it further. But so far,
Right.
Sessions has refused to put in place a special counsel because there isn't sufficient evidence for there to
I
be
don't
a special
think we need a
counsel.
special
David, let me
And
jump
all
in.
of this,
David, let me
in
jump
the
in
end,
here.
all of this
David.
is